Good evening and welcome again to the Marty Heiser Show, where you always get the truth. You always. You know, you can go out there in the world and you can look for truth. You can look behind a tree. You can go see, go to the Himalayan mountains and go to the top and say, hey, what's the truth? What's really the truth? And, right here on this little cable TV show, one cut above Wayne's World, this is where you're going to get the truth. Isn't that right, Dave?
Exactly right.
Exactly. And that's our tagline, isn't it?
That's pretty original.
That is really good. The Marty Heiser Show, where you always get the truth. Now, YouTube is an incredible thing to watch. You can sit there, it's almost like Facebook. You just kind of cue into it and you start looking at different videos. And my good friend David Strait turned me on to a video that was a bit unnerving. It showed in Egypt that the Christian church is coming under heavy persecution. We're going to try and cue up that video for you later in the day. We're not technically advanced enough to have it for you right away. But I would encourage you, go to YouTube. Punch in Egypt, punch in attack on church, punch in attack on Coptic Christians, and see what's going on. Al-Qaeda inspired attacks on Christians. And I remind you, as happy as we are that Mubarak is out, and as excited as it is to see people power in the streets, remember 1979 in Tehran. Remember what happened there, because they had nice little college students that were upset with the Shah. And they took over our embassy. I'll never forget it because I was in college at the time. That's when Nightline started on ABC. They took over our embassy and they took us hostage until Ronald Reagan was elected. And Ronald Reagan was asked, what are you going to do about Iran? Are you going to negotiate with them? And he responded by saying, I'm not going to negotiate with barbarians. And lo and behold, the minute that Reagan came to office, Tehran got a little enlightenment and decided the best thing to do was to free the American hostages. Go to YouTube, look at some of these videos of what's going on in Egypt. It's not over. There's a vacuum there, and it's very important to see who's going to fill that vacuum. I'll tell you what is being filled in Egypt right now, and that's in the Suez Canal. Iranian warships, for the first time in 30 years, are going right up that waterway where they weren't before. So, look, I'm all for democracy. I hope what we're seeing in Libya and Egypt and Tunisia and everywhere else, and oh, by the way, especially Iran, I hope we see a new flowering of democracy and freedom throughout the Middle East. But I'll tell you, it's fraught with danger. What we're seeing right now in Egypt, where they're persecuting Christians and the minorities, keep an eye on that. Go to those YouTube videos. It's chilling. It's chilling. That's my thought for this morning. One other thing, Michael Moore. This guy, I mean, I hate to say it. I've seen all his movies. Something of dollars for Columbine.
Well, that's his sign language, describing himself in sign language.
As leaning to the left?
Or a loser.
Or just being a loser? Yeah, right. I do remember at the Democratic National Convention that Michael Moore had a choice seat sitting next to Jimmy Carter. And so he was quite embraced at the Democratic National Convention. I also was in Madison Square Garden for the Republican Convention, and guess who was there?
Who's that?
Member of the press, Michael Moore.
Nice. Well, you know why his last name's Moore, right? I mean, look at the picture. It's more cake, more pie, more chips, more soda, right? Whatever it takes.
Well, I will not stand by and have this studio defiled with ad hominem personal attacks against Michael Moore, who may be somewhat, calorically challenged, but who of us isn't, really, when you look at it? We all have a few pounds. But boy, he can take like Fahrenheit 9/11.
Yep.
He basically interviewed one state trooper from Oregon and said, hey, are you in charge of defending the entire West Coast, against invasions by terrorists or something like that? He twists it quite a lot. But of late, Michael Moore, my crack team here, he says we're sitting on the money, the great there. I guess it's the owner of capital or
everybody that makes over $250,000
evil corporations, that's the there. They are sitting on the money. They're using it for their own. They're putting it in someplace else with no interest in helping people with our life with that money. We've allowed them to take that. That's not theirs. That's a national resource. That's ours. I guess this is like private property. It's his.
Right.
So what's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine.
Right.
And by the way, this is telling. We have an expert here. As of right now, he's just sitting here while we rant. But this is part of the program. We got 60 minutes. It's It's commercial free. We're all volunteers. This is a great outlet for me.
The night is young.
The night is young, and we're going to get to you, but we're going to talk about some very interesting tax policy. But listen to Michael Moore's tax policy. What's mine is mine, what's yours is mine, and what you're going to make in the future, by the way, is also mine. And here he goes on. We've allowed them to take that. That's not theirs. That's a national resource. That's ours. We all have this. We've all benefited from this, and we all suffer as a result of not having it, Michael Moore told someone. The money he's referring to is the money that wealthy Americans have earned for themselves or inherited, or if that or if that's a distinction matters, and they keep it in the bank. In the same interview, Moore also said that private sector jobs are something that we collectively own. Does that mean that we're all entitled to a cut of the proceeds from Fahrenheit 9/11? I'll take that show, and we'll see. I don't think so. I don't think Michael Moore is going to say that we are entitled to the fruit of his labor. Okay, so to review, keep an eye on the Middle East. It ain't over. I'm telling you, it ain't over. I hope for the best. I hope for peaceful, loving, open, free market economies with democracies and everyone's voting and you know, butterflies start floating around and everyone's loving and happy. But what I'm seeing in the persecution of the Christian church in the Middle East, at least in Egypt, is chilling. It's really chilling, and we should keep an eye on it. Our guest this evening is my new best friend in the world, a man who's going to take the tax code and he's going to explain it to us, and he's going to tell us kind of how all messed up it really is. But I don't want to steal his thunder, but I want to thank Michael Actis Grande for joining us. And geez, Michael, you're leaving me hanging here, but you got this is the shake the hand part.
Pleasure to be here.
But we want to thank Michael for coming in. Now, Michael, among other things, is a tax expert. He's the founder and principal of Actis Grande Roman and Company, LLC. They're located in Danbury. He's been in the tax consulting business and a CPA for over 35 years. Educated at Lee Iacocca's own Lehigh University, as well as the local Pace University. And if you live up to even 10% of your billing, as far as being smart, knowing the tax code, and you're gonna explain it to this vast viewing audience in a way that they can understand, tonight will be a successful show.
Pressure's on.
Pressure is on big time. Now, there are a couple things you wanted to talk about, and one in general is just how tax law has exponentially grown, and we had some interesting statistics on that. Why don't you go through those?
Well, for example, when I...
and thanks for joining us.
No, pleasure. When I started doing this over 35 years ago and started my career, what you'd see is one revenue bill, for example, on taxes maybe once every 2, 3, sometimes 4 years. Now what we've evolved to is we're at a point now where we get maybe 4 or 5 tax bills a year. For example, just within the last 2 years, we have 14 different bills passed, all containing tax provisions. Mm-hmm. This was unheard of. This was unheard of 30, 35, maybe 20 years ago.
Wait. 14 different changes to the law within one calendar year?
Within 2 years.
Within
2 years.
Now, is this at the federal level, the state level?
This is just the federal level. This is just the federal level. See, what happens now is we don't just pass just tax bills anymore. Mm-hmm. Now what happens is we add tax provisions, for example, onto trade bills. We add them onto other legislation that isn't necessarily tax related. Uh-huh. So while it may not be a comprehensive 1,000-page tax provision, nevertheless there are tax provisions in this legislation.
Wow.
And it's...
Can I give an example of that?
Sure, go ahead.
The Obamacare bill, my understanding, you would know better.
Well, that's...
All of a sudden...
That's this book.
Wow.
That's basically this book. And that's somewhat written in the vernacular. Mm-hmm. So that's just...
So this is Obamacare for dummies right here.
Well, that's just the tax sections.
Wow.
So what do you think that's adding in terms of cost to the private sector, in terms of, for me or a corporation or something like that? Is this increasing our cost by 20, 30% on having taxes done?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. Certainly from a compliance standpoint, it's going to be significantly add cost to it. I mean, just the tax provisions alone are going to have to be addressed. I mean, we've gone from approximately, about 10 years ago, there were 480 tax forms out there. Now we're pushing 600 in a matter of 10 years. And that really only adds maybe one form in 2010 as a result of the Health Care Act. The credit for allowing small businesses, generally, let's say, employers employing 25 people down to 10, and providing them with health care benefits. The tax credit mechanism is dizzyingly complex to the point where you wonder if the cost of actually computing the credit, if you're going to hire an accountant to do it, you might just be better off not claiming the credit. It's insanely complex. And this is, is it typical of what we're going to see? Because most of these health care provisions really don't kick in until 2013. So, the fun's just beginning.
Well, at some point tonight, and I don't want to get out of order from what you have lined up, but at some point I wanted to ask you, how many companies do you think are going to go ahead and pay the $2,000 fine and just drop health care for their employees?
I think you're going to see a lot of them doing it.
And what do you think the net savings is for a mid-sized company?
Could be in the thousands. I mean, look at what they're paying now for healthcare.
So per employee, a company could be saving thousands of dollars by just dropping health care.
Well, I mean, for example, if you're insuring let's say you're insuring a 55-year-old worker now, family coverage.
Okay.
For decent coverage, decent coverage, Fairfield County, you might be spending up to close to $2,000 a month. Now, if I have the opportunity basically to walk away from that cost and maybe just pay a $2,000 penalty,
you save 22 grand.
What's not to like?
So you could see people being dropped en masse.
Yes.
Okay.
It's funny because during this debate on Obamacare, that's exactly what they were saying. They were saying this whole system is rigged. They want to have the one-payer, socialized medicine. That's what they're after. And these guys, one after another, went on TV and said, no, we don't. No, we don't want that. And exactly what you said. I mean, you can pay a fine that would essentially pay 1 month's medical insurance for an employee. I mean, who wouldn't go with that? And then everything gets thrown back into the lap of the nanny state, and you have centralized control of 1/6 of the economy going to Washington. It's exactly what was said during that debate,
right.
and it's exactly what we see happening here.
Right.
It's incredibly frustrating.
If you want to even bring it to let me just for a second, I'll bring it to a more basic level. If the intent is simplification of the tax code, and we all hear about it, all right?
Yeah.
This is not the answer. Yeah. I mean, this is not the answer.
I mean, the example that I was going to say was this 1099 requirement, where you have to.
Well, that looks like it's going to be history.
Yeah, I know it's history.
Should never have been in there in the first place.
Exactly. That's what kind of ticks me off, is because this new spokesman, the news spokesman or the press secretary in the White House, they'll say, well, we just had a governor's convention in Washington, and some of the governors are saying that the responsibilities and the costs resulting from Obamacare are bankrupting their states, with Medicaid expenses and so forth. And he'll look out and sort of, graciously, the big, nanny state government will say, oh, don't worry. We'll listen to what you have to say, and we'll take it in a case-by-case basis, and we'll make some adjustments. It reminds me of, all those unions and everything that are getting, what is it called again?
Waivers.
Oh, waivers, yeah.
By the way, 759.
White House, I'm still waiting for my waiver. I sent you the letter asking for a waiver for my little painting company on that, and haven't heard back. I'll check my mailbox. There may be something there. But you know, it's this idea that, well, come talk to us. We'll see if we can work something out. Oh, you say your state's going bankrupt because of this Obamacare? Well, come talk to us. So we'll see if we can do. Oh, unions, and you're the guy that have given our campaign millions and millions of dollars and political allies. I know this Obamacare is oppressive for you. You know, come talk to us. We'll give you a waiver. Oh, you don't like the 1099 thing? Okay, we'll back off of that. Well, why did you come there anyways? Why is the government in my business? Why are you so deep in our pocket? Why don't you just leave us alone? It's still America. We're still supposed to be a free country. But anyways.
His engine doesn't idle very long, I'll just tell you that.
All right, sorry. Okay, so that was an example I thought of the tax code seeping into health care and everything else.
Well,
but what are some other
what's
examples?
interesting is the 1099 requirement was basically put in as a means of helping to fund it. All right, now, where arguably Congress miscalculated was on the burden that was going to be put onto businesses in connection with compliance.
What was the potential cost of that? It was billions.
It was billions, but they had another motive. And the other motive was as a means of perhaps to try to tap into the underground economy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, the trick is cross-reporting. If you can report, if you can get an employer to report a payment and file that document with the government, then it's going to be very difficult for the individual recipient to avoid declaring that income. So there is some of that also. And you know, that's the underground economy, of course, is still a real issue in this country.
Any idea what percent of GDP it is?
You know, it varies. It varies from
3 to 5.
I hear different estimates from year to year. I hear sometimes in 10%. I hear sometimes 15%.
Yeah.
Sometimes I hear it's $1 trillion a year. But you know, it's there, and it has two facets. There is, of course, certainly an illegal component to the underground economy, which is drug trafficking, loan sharking, et cetera. And there is the legal aspect of it. The individual who hires a contractor, for example, to modernize a bathroom, pays the contractor $8,000 cash. Well, the intent, of course, is the contractor's not going to declare that in income. So there's lost tax revenue there. So you got two pieces of it. The government is trying to, with the 1099 requirement, one of the things was to try to capture that. But you can't saddle businesses with increased compliance costs. And
sure you can.
Well,
sure you can. You do it all the time. I mean, you run a business in New York State. What you have to do. We did a project for West Point. And when you consider the federal government, the OSHA requirements, there was a full-time OSHA staff person, the EPA requirements now that they have with, lead abatement and everything else, the Army Corps of Engineers that are breathing down your neck. I mean, it's just incredible, the amount of paperwork and bureaucracy that you have to do. There was a pastor, a friend of mine in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He had these little tours that he would take to the Holy Lands. Once every couple of years, he put together 17, 18 parishioners and take them off to the Holy Land. And he'd rent hotel space and a bus and this and that. And he wanted to incorporate this. He wanted to say, hey, let's have a little corporation. The amount of paperwork and headache to put together, Pastor Bob's Holy Land Tour, Inc. in Connecticut, just said, I can't even deal with this. The amount of paperwork, the amount of money, it's just incredible.
The best comment in connection with that I can remember is when Senator George McGovern ran the unsuccessful campaign against Nixon. I think it was in '72.
Yeah.
And when he left politics, I think he went, it might have been in Connecticut or whatever, he opened up like a country inn, a bed and breakfast.
Yeah.
And he was, he stated publicly, he was amazed at the amount of the compliance that he had to complete and run to run a business. And he had said that if he had known what was entailed, he would have had a different perspective when he was in Congress.
The clash of that, I still go back to the 2008 campaign when Barack Obama is going door to door outside of Maryland, and he comes up to this guy, this plumber, now known as Joe the Plumber. And he walks up to him, and Joe the Plumber, who was he worked for another guy, tried to start his own plumbing business, and said, hey, I work hard for this money, why can't I hold on to it? And Barack Obama, the candidate, then said, well, don't you think it's funner if you take that money and we spread it all around? Not unlike what Michael Moore had to say about, it's not your money, it's all of our money. It's a national resource. I mean, that's this concept, this socialized medicine, this idea, this collective. There's no individual property. There's no you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You get to put your capital at risk and try to form something and enjoy the fruits of that. Somehow that, as far as these communists that are in Washington right now are concerned, they just don't see it. And they're going to say, oh no, we have to redistribute this, and it's not fair, and oh, the rich are getting away with it, and this Bush tax cut that's going on. Although you have some interesting figures on who actually pays.
Yeah, let's look at that, because I think a lot of people are surprised when they hear the statistics on this. Every year the IRS releases statistics on the number of individual returns filed, for example, corporation returns filed, and also looks at who is earning the income. Right. And the latest statistics we've got out are for 2008. The top 1% of high-earning Americans generate 39% of the individual tax revenue in this country. And when you take it down to the top 5%, that top 5% raises something like 62% of all the individual tax revenue raised in the United States. Now, that 1% cuts off at about $350,000 of income. That 5% cuts off at about $160,000 of income. So if you figure that the United States has got a population of about 310 million, and you're looking at who is generating that 1%, you're only looking perhaps at about maybe 3.5 million Americans generating that 1% of revenue. Maybe 10 to 15 million generating the 5%. It's significant because when you talk about tax cuts or talk about tax increases, where are you really getting that revenue from? You're really getting it from a fairly select group of individuals when you look at the demographics. And if you further want to break it down, where are these high-income individuals living? Well, for the most part, they're not in Des Moines, Iowa. They're not in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're in the New York metropolitan area, maybe the Route 128 area in Boston, LA area, perhaps San Francisco, Silicon Valley, parts of Chicago, parts of Houston. It's really a fairly small area.
So let me play the devil's advocate on this for a second.
All right.
There's the capitalist side of me that says all taxes basically are bad, and I don't want any more taxes. And that is where I stand. Taxes are out of control. But if you look at the concentration of wealth in America, at some point, in other words, we can look at this and say, hey, 1% of the population pays 39% of the taxes. Geez, that 1%'s really getting hit hard. Or we can say, holy smokes, 1% of the population of this country controls an obscene amount of wealth. Is there a point where this creates a social problem? That's not your field of expertise necessarily. But in your opinion, are we at risk of having too much concentration of wealth in too few hands?
Certainly, if when you look at your fiscal policy, it becomes a problem if in an economic downturn, for example, if that top 1% isn't earning what it did the year before, 2 or 3 years before, you can see the impact it's going to have fiscally when you can't, when you're not getting the same amount of revenue from that percentage. And further, what you can also bet is that if the 1% is getting hurt, the other 4% and the rest of the country is getting hurt as well. But from a standpoint of raising individual revenue, you're really not talking that bottom 95%.
Right.
And at the state level, by the way, it's even more pronounced. In California, that 1% raises 56% of the state's revenue. I mean, that's their deficit now is like, I think, $9 billion and counting. I mean, it's understandable. It's understandable when you look at how those percentages are skewed at the state level. I think Connecticut's like I think the top 1% generates 40% of the revenue. But, you can generate, it has a significant impact when that part of the population isn't generating the wealth.
Because, and we've talked about this before, you look in these Middle East countries and all of a sudden as these despots or these rulers are being overthrown, all of a sudden their net worth comes out or being reported.
Yeah.
So who knows what? We don't know if Mubarak is worth 100 million or 80 billion. Nobody knows. But let's say he is worth 80 billion. All of a sudden, in terms of a percentage of their GDP, that's an enormous percentage of GDP. Is it any wonder there's social unrest? And listen, I'm a pure capitalist, and I'm not, like I said, promoting higher taxes. But the thing I struggle with, and I keep on looking for answers on this, I haven't read anything good. If anybody out there can recommend something for me to read on this topic, I'd love you to call in and recommend it. But I look at it and I say, if 1% of the American population is paying 39% of the taxes in America, are we achieving that same stratification of wealth also? And are we at risk in America of social unrest because the poor are just getting hammered in this economy?
Let me take the other side of that, okay, from a sociological point of view. I've heard the best example of this, that in America, when someone drives down the street with a shiny new car, a shiny new, whatever, Corvette or something
Hybrid.
like that. A shiny new car. The 20-year-old guy standing on the corner sees that guy driving the car, goes by, and he says, you know what? I want to get a car like that. I'm going to work hard and get one of those cars. In a socialized, let's say Europe, that same thing happens in France. And the guy comes by, they'll say, what is that? What did that guy do to rip off the people to get that car? He should be brought down a peg. And I think in America, if you take away that yearning to better yourself, that rugged individualism, the freedom to both rise and fall, and you see it not only in economics, you also see it in politics. I mean, part of the wonder of the presidency of Barack Obama is that you have someone who was born to a single parent, whose grandmother lives in Africa right now, who is of a different minority, and yet he ascended to the highest position in the land.
Oh, that's a great story.
And that's the story of America. America economically, yes, the top 1% pay 39% of the taxes, but you have the freedom, or you used to, you had the freedom to put your money at risk, have a good idea, and go out there and earn it, and you had the right to then keep that money.
So
that's what I'm seeing.
So I'm going to save the answer to I imposed the question, and I'm going to save the answer to the end of the show, but I'm going to let Mike keep going.
One of the things that is, I don't think, talked about enough, and I think it's a serious, we talk about raising revenue, et cetera, but I think it's a serious problem with our competitiveness around the world, is the U.S. corporation tax rate. When you combine the federal corporation top tax rate, 35%, with the tax rate of 24 states in this country, you have the highest, in the industrialized world, you have the highest corporation tax rate in the industrialized world. How do you compete?
You don't.
How do you compete? Now,
Canada's more attractive for corporations right now.
Well, their rate is high. Their rate's still high.
In Asia, in Singapore, you've got 5%. Indonesia, 5% corporate tax rates. Is it any wonder that people are packing up and going over there? So you take the people up in Wisconsin. I'm talking, where's the camera? I'm talking to you guys up there in Wisconsin. You want your collective bargaining. You can keep it. You're all going to be out of jobs. Because guess what? They're going overseas where they only pay 5% on taxes.
You've got...
I'm not sure we're on in Wisconsin, but I don't want to do that.
No, that's okay.
Hey, we will be in a few weeks.
Okay.
We're getting there.
You've got, it might be tougher to move, admittedly it might be tougher sometimes to move manufacturing jobs abroad, but certainly service jobs, back office operations, for example, or large service companies. Do you really need to do some of those functions here at a 40+% tax rate when perhaps you can go to Switzerland? Ireland is 12.5%. And it's a situation that's got to be addressed. To the Obama administration's credit, they've identified this. But now, of course, if you're going to cut the corporation tax rate, which you really need to do, where are you going to make up the difference? Do you go, I mean, could you go back to the individuals, that 1%, that 139%, and get it from them? I don't think really that's the answer either.
No, but see, I disagree with your premise, if I could be so bold, because you're the pro.
Well, be so bold.
Okay. Your premise is that if you cut the corporate tax rate, that's going to mean less revenue to the government. And I think that the Reagan Revolution back in the 80s sort of showed, demythed that. And actually JFK did it before him. And that was Reagan. I mean, the tax rate when Reagan first came into office was something like 70%. You would know better.
Well, what he did, you had, at that particular point, you had a situation, and it wasn't that far back from memory. You had the rate on unearned income, interest and dividends, for example, at 70%. Earned income, you got a break. You got a break. You got taxed at only 50%. And it got to the point where there was no incentive to save, and things had to radically change. And they did. To Reagan's credit, he probably took the first steps towards simplifying and try to getting it right. Reduce the number of rates, brackets, etc.
Here's the beauty of that. You cut rates, as you well know. I know this is basic stuff,
right?
But you cut tax rates, and it's counterintuitive because you think, wow, we're going to be collecting less taxes. No, 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 no. You're building a way bigger pie.
And let me give you an example.
And revenues to the government over the course of the 80s doubled. So let me just finish my point. So when you start talking about corporate tax rates, because by the way, 19 out of the 20 most polluted cities on the planet are in China. 70% of the people in India don't have indoor plumbing. You know, America, Fairfield County, the greater Danbury area is a great place to live. I mean, great schools, great amenities, it's beautiful and everything else. So if corporations need to live somewhere, need to be somewhere, and we have a reasonable tax rate, they would just as soon set up shop in Fairfield County, Connecticut as anywhere else, these low tax havens. So I would submit to you that if you cut the corporate tax rate, that far from having to make it up somewhere else because it's a zero-sum game, I would say that you would be attracting corporations much like you'd be attracting individuals. Look at Texas and Florida that don't have an income tax, and it would be to the benefit of everyone else.
People find it hard to believe.
Caller, are you calling to agree with what I just said?
I called with a couple questions.
Oh, okay, I was hoping you were going to agree, but I'll let you go on anyways. Go right ahead.
Just simply, does a complicated tax system foster corruption? That's one. And why is the tax code so corrupt? That's all. Thanks.
Excellent question. Thank you very much for calling in. How about that? Does a complicated, nuanced tax code foster corruption?
I think what fosters corruption, the complexity of the code doesn't help in the sense people may get frustrated, etc. But I'm not so sure that in of itself does it, because 82% of Americans get some kind of help figuring out the taxes. They may not like it, and you can argue that that's maybe a very unproductive way to spend your discretionary dollars.
And actually, the cost of that
it's put
keeps
your
going
kids
up.
through college, hasn't it?
Well, it's kept me off the soup line.
Okay, there you go.
It's kept me off the soup line. But I think one of the factors that will not foster compliance is cheating. Let's take two fictional couples. Let's take the Joneses and let's take the Smiths. Husband and wife, the Joneses, they make $90,000 in salary, and they're employed. Their neighbors, the Smiths, however, are both self-employed. And, well, why don't we say they're not the most patriotic when it comes to paying their taxes. They're undeclaring they're undeclaring some of their income. Now, the problem is the Joneses see this. Do they get frustrated to the point where they'll report the Smiths to the IRS or to the state? You know, perhaps. But the state and the IRS don't have the resources to audit everybody. So there's no guarantee that that complaint isn't going to go anywhere. So what happens? So maybe, now the Joneses can't just stop not declaring their salary because it's on a W-2 and it's filed on their taxes. It's not that easy. But maybe what the Joneses do is, now maybe they start paying more cash for some of the services they need to beat the sales tax, for example. Because, well, heck, the Smiths are getting away with it. I need to find something to do also to get away with it as well. I think that is, I think in those situations, people are more inclined to want to not comply when they see situations like that. To further goad people as well, maybe in my fictional example, the Smiths have reduced their income to the point perhaps where their child gets aid for college, and the Jones who are playing it straight don't. So that's the problem.
Caller, we don't know who you are. We don't know. There's no reverse tracing of the call. Have you ever paid cash for something to get out of paying taxes?
No, I'm just wondering why the tax code needs to be so complex.
I have an answer for that.
Well, go ahead.
Excellent question. Excellent question. Thank you.
So here's the answer from a guy that knows very little about taxes. The reason is because the more complex, the more they can baffle you and end up with more of your money, and you can't really explain how it got there. And they can add all these layers and end up getting more money without any explanation.
Well, I'll look at it. I'll look at it a little bit differently.
You can't convince them, confuse them, is what he's saying.
Unfortunately, what's happened now is that it's no longer just as simple to use the tax law to raise revenue. That's what it was designed to do. So now what's happened is we now use the tax code as a means of changing social policy and to provide patronage to special interests.
Redistribute the wealth.
That's where the problem is. So if you're in the logging industry, all right, you need your special breaks, for example, on timber reserves or whatever.
Are those earmarks?
Well, they're earmarks buried in the tax code.
That's right.
And that's part of the problem. You have special interests, basically, who are stepping in there to, get their niche. I'll read you a great comment out of the Economist. This goes back, I think this was one of the April 3rd or April 10th issue, and I think it really says it all. Every wrinkle in the tax code represents a favor to some group. It could be a small group, such as loggers, or a huge one, such as homeowners. Politicians use the tax code to encourage things they like, such as driving hybrid cars, and to discourage things they don't like, such as work. A typical loophole has passionate defenders, but no opponents. Those who benefit from it benefit a lot. Those who would gain from its repeal, i.e. taxpayers in general, have never heard of it. So the mess gets even messier. Happy April 15th. And even that can't be easy. This year, since April 15th is a holiday in the District of Columbia, and federal offices are closed, the April 15th deadline has been extended to Monday, April 18th. We can't even get the filing date simplified.
Let me ask you, is there a point where where you can't generate any more revenue regardless of where you take the tax rate?
I think what happens, I think to your point, and Marty, I think to the point you raised earlier, is at what point do rates get high enough where they become a disincentive to work?
We're there.
All right. Now, for example, here's an example. Husband and wife.
Let me
all right, go ahead.
Save that thought 1 second. We got an esteemed caller calling in here.
Yeah, we have Al Robinson joining the show, the founder and purveyor of Hat City Blog. Hat City Blog, go look at Hat City Blog. Al, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I got a question for you. I want you to take a break from the two conservative magpies on each side and talk about just average people here. Average people.
Did you call us conservative magpies?
No, bagpipes, I think.
Was it magpies, the bird?
Yeah, like Heckle and Jekyll.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure I'm all right.
All right, look. A few things. It says, working families have a lot of questions about taxes. And I just want to throw a couple of things at you and just get your response to it. Could you tell me, number one, what is the advantage of owning a home as compared to renting when it comes to taxes? And number two, in your at your time as a CPA, I'm sure you've done a lot of filings with people. What are some of the things that people do in terms of filing taxes that basically screws them out of money? Like, not writing off certain, like not putting into their property taxes, like into their state income tax, so they lose the value of their property tax on their cars. What can they do to save money in terms of not giving taxes and not giving money to the government that should be in their own pockets? Thanks.
Excellent question. Thanks.
Well, let's start with home ownership.
Yes.
The mortgage interest deduction and the deduction for real estate taxes is almost seems like a right. Mm-hmm. And why does Congress allow a deduction for mortgage interest and real estate taxes? Well, it goes back to a premise that homeowners make better citizens. We as a government want to promote better citizenship. Therefore, we want people to own their homes. Let's give them an incentive to do it. And that's the motive. That's the motive there. Mm-hmm. We're, by the way, one of the few countries in the industrialized world that provides a tax deduction for mortgage interest and real estate taxes. Most countries don't. And but that's an incentive. That's an incentive to home ownership.
We were so keen on having home ownership that we came up with these subprime mortgages, and that didn't really work out so good. But
there's an example of something that was intended to be a good thing and was for years, that just got totally turned around.
The law of unintended consequences.
Well, it worked pretty good for Bernie Madoff too, right? It's just a big Ponzi scheme, right?
Well, kind of, yeah. But I mean, home ownership is good. But anyways, go ahead.
All right. So that's and the advantage, and one of the advantages of owning the home, of course, is that you get these benefits.
So you rent, you can't write off your rent on your taxes, but
unless you happen to be using
interest payments.
Unless you happen to be using part of your rent as in your business, in which case then you can write off an allocable portion of it. But homeowners, of course, can do that too.
If you've never heard the word allocable, what you need to do is call Michael Atkiss Grande, and he'll work on what was the word again?
Allocable.
Allocable. Because if you're avoiding your allocable deductions, you could be losing a fortune. But that's where how many billions of dollars are spent on tax preparation? You had it here.
Yeah, I think one economist estimated that it was about $130 billion a year.
Oh yeah, here we go. Americans spend close to $130 billion on tax preparation and compliance, because that's where you can use words like allocable. Sorry, go right ahead.
No, that's okay.
All right.
Now, one of the best areas, one of the things that the government does do, and there's a lot of sections and some good law here, is promoting retirement savings. The government wants people saving money for retirement, which is why we allow money to go into 401k plans, 403b plans, why we allow people to put money into IRAs, for example.
Is that an incentive to save so they can tax you later, so there's a little nest egg there for them to get more taxes, or is that for you?
Well, that's hard to say. That's hard to say. The presumption, I think, is...
Dave has become very cynical. He always looks at it.
Well, let me ask you, this year you were allowed to take a certain portion, well, as much as you wanted out of your IRA, a portion out of your IRA and open a Roth IRA.
Well, what you could do, you could convert...
Yes.
The law allowed you to convert what you had in an IRA to a Roth IRA. So
without the penalty, but you'd have to pay the tax.
You'd have to pay the tax.
Right. So if you were on a very low tax rate for this year, there was an incentive maybe to do that.
For example, if you had, let's say you had a 30-year-old individual in a 15% tax bracket who had $5,000 in an IRA. That individual converting that IRA to a Roth, let's say the IRA is now worth $15,000. For what is basically maybe a 20% tax cost, let's say 15% federal, 5% Connecticut. For what is basically, in my example, a $2,000 tax cost, for the purpose of now allowing the assets in that Roth IRA to accumulate on a tax-free basis, that's a pretty good deal. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty good incentive.
So in your mind, what's the break point in terms of effective tax rate where a person should look at doing that? In other words, if your effective tax rate is 20%, probably makes sense to pay 20%.
Probably makes sense to do it.
Right?
It probably makes sense.
But if you're up at 35%, probably doesn't.
Even then, that depends. If you have an individual, let's say somebody in that 1% category, all right, and they've got, and let's say these retirement assets are assets that they are not, that they know or believe that they are not going to need in their retirement, all right, it might make sense for them to convert the IRA to a Roth, pay what might seemingly be a high rate. Why? They're not going to need those assets for retirement. If the assets are in a Roth IRA, there's no mandatory distribution, no mandatory requirement to withdraw from those accounts that there is in an IRA. Now, further, if they happen to have children and they're going to pass that account on to them, the tax-free accumulation continues into the next generation. Well, that's a pretty good incentive to convert the account now.
Perfect.
You know,
even though the rate's high.
I'm just glad that this show is now on Cablevision, because what he's describing is people that have way too much money that they can't even spend it all in their lifestyle. We can go to this guy Roth and put it in there. It's essentially what you're saying in layman's terms. Caller, oh my gosh. Caller, do you have so much money that you're not going to be able to spend it all in your lifetime?
No, you're making my point about the complication. I mean, just look at what you guys are talking about. I mean, there's got to be a simpler approach to how you can tax people and generate revenue than all these hidden places that the people that are well-to-do or in the know can access. That's all, simply.
So you would go for maybe a flat tax or just a more simplified tax code. Is that what you're saying? There'd be less opportunity for mischief.
Well, let's look at that.
Yes,
that's an interesting
a flat tax, less opportunities for judgments or misjudgments, really clean, low level, and fair and equitable to everyone, and yet still fills the coffers. And I believe that's possible.
Excellent. All right.
Here's the issue. And it's been talked about before, and those taxes tend to be more consumption-based. The theory is that if you use a consumption-based tax, like a flat tax, you've got a better chance of maybe capturing this underground economy. And there are proponents for that.
That's what happened in Russia. When they went to a flat tax, all of a sudden revenues exploded, and all of a sudden all the wealthy people started paying taxes. So it seems to me that one of the real problems that we've created in America today is that we continue to separate people. And what we need to do is be bringing people together. What we need to do is treat everybody the same. Like George Bush said when he was president, he said, you know what, the really wealthy, they don't pay a lot in taxes in terms of their effective tax rate. I mean, they have ways to get around it. You have to, and you made the comment before the show came on, you said people that are making $45,000 or less, married with kids, don't pay any, what do you say, personal income tax?
They're not paying the personal income tax.
Right.
The way the rate structure is set with exemptions and with certain credits, they're in a situation where they may not pay the individual income tax. Where they're only paying the Social Security tax. And in connection with that, as part of some of the tax law changes that took effect at least this year, we did something that was unprecedented. We reduced the Social Security tax by 2% in terms of increasing people's paychecks. In my memory, I can't ever recall that being done. Now, we did it to stimulate the economy, that's fine.
So why do people call this guy a liberal?
Who are you talking about, Obama?
Yeah. He cut the Social Security tax. He extended the Bush tax cuts. He's a conservative.
He did it for 2 years. Congress did it for 2 years. It's true.
It's beautiful. Keep going. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Now, I think the biggest problem you're going to have, though, with a consumption-based tax
Larry,
or flat tax,
you need to jump in here.
Is
call Barack Obama conservative.
How do you transition it? How do you transition it?
Right.
Hold on one second.
The risk of going cold turkey, of saying, you know what, we're going to scrap the system we've got effective January 1, 2012, and we're going to replace it with a flat tax or some other simpler tax scheme. The risk that the government has is you may not like the current system as it is, but you've got a pretty good handle on the revenue it's going to generate. The risk of changing the system cold turkey is you might generate too much revenue and then really choke the economy, or you may not generate enough, which may create
the government.
which might really choke the government.
The downside of that is...
Well, let's ask Larry. Larry, what are your thoughts? We have Larry Ditka joining us, a very prominent investment person, and we suspect he has an incredibly high IQ. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, Marty, I just had a couple of comments which I wanted to make, in part based on what I said last week when I had the great pleasure to be on the show. If you recall, I mentioned that I volunteer at the Community Action Center here in Danbury in terms of preparing tax returns for people. And I recently did a return for a woman who's single. She makes about $30,000. And she, even though she had the Making Work Pay credit for $400 and the Earned Income credit, she still wound up paying a couple of $1,000s in taxes because she wasn't able actually to itemize. So there are people who certainly are, even at the lower economic spectrum, they still pay taxes. And I also wanted to ask your guest, he was making a point about the interest rate deduction on homes. One, a lot of people can't itemize and can't get the benefit of the deduction. And two, I would say it really wasn't about making for better citizens. It was really more about the real estate lobby having its way, getting its influence, because it made housing more affordable. And I guess the only other question I wanted to ask about a flat tax, would he be in favor of not so much a flat tax, but fewer deductions, fewer exemptions, but a graduated income tax with lower marginal rates?
Well, we had that. We were getting toward that in the Reagan years. And certainly you can make the brackets wide enough. The trick is, can you make the brackets wide enough to still generate the same amount of revenue? Mm-hmm. And I think if you bring the rates, the presumption is if you bring the rates down low enough, you can probably eliminate some of the other deductions in connection with getting there. Maybe you take away some of the real estate tax deduction or the mortgage interest deduction, maybe even scale back the state income tax deduction, which effectively you really have anyway. We didn't even touch on the alternative minimum tax, which of course is out there, and by the way raises a lot of revenue, which is why it hasn't been scrapped. But
it cost me a fortune.
And it costs a lot of people. And when you get, and that by the way is the closest thing we've got to a flat tax, because essentially you get very few deductions against against alternative minimum taxable income. But it raises a lot of revenue, and frankly, unless things change, it's not going away. It's not going away. But in terms of where it will go, where it will go forward, I don't know. I think you're going to see the status quo. I think you're going to see the status quo for a while.
Gotcha. Is Larry still on?
Yeah, Larry, you're still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, did you have a comment about really the real estate lobby getting its way for the interest rate deduction as opposed to just a general
Larry,
for better citizens?
I'd say this. That might be the case now. That wasn't the presumption when those provisions were put in years back. But that's what it's become. And look, we homeowners have arguably a vested interest in keeping the mortgage interest and real estate tax deduction. I mean, are we part of the problem too? I don't know. But I mean, that's certainly in some circles, some people would say that we're special interests as well.
Thanks for calling, Larry. We're going to see you in the studio soon.
You got it, Marty. Look forward to it.
So I don't want anybody getting off the show tonight thinking that I actually gave Obama credit for being conservative, okay? Just for the record, no, he is not. I don't want to be associated with that comment.
No. Well, I mean, as far as the tax code goes, he did, under duress, I would say, extended the Bush era, what they call tax cuts. It's no tax cut. It's just extending, the tax percentages as they are right now.
They did something else, though, I thought that was very helpful and for businesses. I mean, basically, we're allowing businesses that buy new equipment, we're effectively allowing them to write off 100% of the cost of the equipment. And in year one. And
that's
and
big.
that's,
I mean, do you
and
think that's
huge.
accounting for some? You've seen Caterpillar, John Deere, all these heavy industries that they're having incredible earnings. Are they getting a boost from this, you think?
I suspect. But the biggest problem there is, you know, I don't know a lot of businesses that can just go out and write a check for a $500,000 piece of equipment. They need their banks basically to be on board. And it's been very tough to get credit.
Is that changing at all from where you're
I think it's changing a little bit. I think it's starting to change now.
So the dam's breaking. The money's starting to come out.
But it's not, the dam hasn't collapsed. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'll tell you, it is interesting. It's fascinating. You know, I'm a simple man with a simple mind and simple concepts flowing through that simple mind. I love the idea of Tax Freedom Day. You know, it's something where you can look at and you can say, out of the 50 states, how many days do I have to get up, go to work, by the sweat of my brow, gain money just to pay my state, local, and federal taxes? And out of 50 states, Connecticut is dead last. You've got to work until, I think it's April 26th, every year from January 1 to April 26th, just to pay your taxes. And I think what's happening now with this most recent great recession that we're maybe in the middle of, maybe towards the end of, I hope it's towards the end of it, I think people are seeing that we don't have a tax problem, or what liberals tend to call a revenue problem. We're taxed enough. We're ponying up enough money. It's the state and federal and governments that need to somehow tighten their belts. Somehow, you know, the party's over. We're running these deficits that are completely unsustainable. And I think it ties in with the tax code, but I think it's a non-starter to say, well, we gotta, you know, you gotta punch up the taxes here and punch up the taxes there, which some places are trying to do. But I think people have had enough. And they're saying, look, I'm spending enough in taxes, and that's it.
The show next week, what do we got?
Okay, we have some exciting shows coming up. Next week, we're going to see a behind-the-scenes look at the Danbury Whalers hockey team. These are a great bunch of young guys. They're playing great hockey, and you're going to see behind the scenes. You're going to see the speeches between periods. Miracle on Ice has got nothing on us. That's next week. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have Paul DeMarco back. They have those great concerts at the Palace Theater, and you're going to want to see them. I want to thank my guests, Michael Actis Grande, for coming in. Thanks for putting up with us. I know I get to be a little long-winded.
What were we called earlier in the show?
Magpies. Some magpies, bagpipes, you know, it was bad. So join us again next week, and we'll see you right here, because this is where you find the truth, and the truth is always here. What is it?
Really butchered that.
All right, we'll see you next week on the Marty Heiser Show. Good night.